This week's episode is brought to you by the home and auto insurance brand Canadians trust most, Intact Insurance.
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the Jann Arden podcast and show. I'm here in Toronto where there is a heat wave, and I feel like my underpants have disappeared up my bum. That's all I want to say. I walk down the street with underpants, and within 10 or 15 minutes, my underpants have been eaten by my own body. But welcome to the show. Sarah Burke, Caitlin Green. Caitlin, tell us what is fucking going on in this world, and I just want to start right away. I am so goddamn jealous of you. I am Celine.
Oh my
You
God.
went to, so I'm going to shut up. Go.
I went to the premiere at TIFF, and if you want to see it in theaters, because I do feel that if you're a hardcore Celine fan, it's like the Taylor Swift documentary, but not like a big concert fun party, but it's like you're there with other fans and people are giving their emotional responses audibly in the theater. So it is playing at TIFF if you're here in Toronto.
People are gasping, I would imagine.
Oh my God, like you're crying, you're gasping, you're laughing, you're saying, oh my God, out loud. Like somebody was like, our queen. Like people are just like, they're her like fans. Like her fans are very, very, very loyal about this. And so this issue of her having stiff person syndrome has been in the news. It's kept her away from performing for a long time. So this documentary titled I Am Celine, which is going to be released on Amazon Prime as well, is all about pulling back the curtain on what she's been dealing with in her health and in her life and why it's kept her away from the stage. And I really appreciated the fact that she did this for her fans to say, this is why I was canceling shows. Lots of celebrities will say, I have an ear infection, I have this, whatever. No, this is serious and this is what's going on. And I'm going to tell them because you can tell she considers her fans to be family. So it was, there was a red carpet. There were celebrities there, and there was a live stream between the New York City premiere where she physically attended in person and then the Toronto premiere. And so we got to see her on the screen, come out on stage, introduce the film. The director of the film introduced it as well and went into some of the details on it and how amazing it was to work with Celine and how she just like gave everything. And it's just her telling her life story herself. And it's so good. I mean, I'm not just being hyperbolic because I'm a fan. It is Academy Award level, in my opinion, as a documentary fan. The score, not even just her music, like the use of the cello, there was so much of it that was fantastic. And you see her have, though, this crisis level seizure on camera towards the end of the film. And it's just so unbelievable to witness because it's an exceptionally rare medical disorder. And you're not sure what it means when you hear stiff person syndrome and that she has muscle spasms. Like you don't know how serious this is. And you walk away feeling like she is so lucky to be alive and to have the care that she does. And she's obviously creating endowments now to continue research into this. And she's doing a lot of this to raise public awareness about it.
And she has people in her home caring for her 24/7.
Oh, and you see them, they are they're her lifeline. They are there with her every step of the way.
Not everybody has that.
No. And she says that. She says, she has all these resources and this fame and this even without her medical team, she has this team of other people behind her from her years in the entertainment industry. So she really does have everybody kind of rooting for her.
Did she talk about how the idea to actually do the documentary came about? Like, did she approach them or did they approach her? Like, how did?
I think that the inception of it was that she wanted to tell her story and she made contact with this woman. And I forget which other documentaries she's done in the music and the performer space. Her first name is Irene and I'm forgetting her second name, but she wanted to work with her and man, did she pick the right person.
Yes,
and that
Irene
Taylor, that's it. Yeah.
She said when she walked in, she was gobsmacked at how sick Celine was, and that she had no makeup on, hair pulled back, white crisp shirt, and came to the door, and she was like, "Holy fuck, this woman is really, really sick."
Yeah. And she's not leaving her house. And she talks about the stress of canceling shows. And then if she is feeling sort of okay, she still didn't want to go out with her kids and be seen having a good time because she's in the midst of canceling all these shows and fans are going to see her being happy. And then think, well, I thought you weren't actually doing so well. And that's why you're canceling all your shows right now. So it pulls back the curtain on how that would impact a performer psychologically to be in that space. You also see This is a woman who has only ever known performing, only ever wanted to sing her whole life. She has been doing this since she was 12 years old. And so the grief associated with losing this piece of her identity is crazy. And the fact that she is still steadfast in her resolve to return in some capacity to the stage, however she may be able to do that, however she sounds,
What truth
is
about that?
I mean, it's tough to imagine the way that the film ends that she is going to be back in the mix anytime soon. There have been rumors, endless rumors always online about could she pop up at the Olympics in Paris? Could she be like these things happen?
But all those things that they've talked about with stiff person's disease
Mhm.
is that lights are triggers, motions are triggers, sounds are triggers, the excitement, accelerated heart rate, adrenaline, like anything to do with your immune system. So imagine, you know, even conceivably considering something like singing at the Paris Olympics, what
Oh,
goes along with the preparation. Like, even if you, let's just put this out there, even if you lip sync to a track that was pre-done, you still have to stand there physically holding a microphone or stand. And conceivably, she could go into these fits by just standing because she doesn't know when they're coming. Is this
no.
correct?
Yeah, you watch her. She tries to record towards the end of the film, and this is if spoiler alert for anyone who wants to like. But
Turn us off for a moment.
yeah, earmuffs or fast forward by 15 seconds. So she goes into the studio to perform for the first time in 2 years, and she's on day 2 of trying to do this, and it is a very emotionally triggering, depleting thing for her because if it doesn't go well, she feels like she's worked all these years to come to this point, and it hasn't panned out for her, and she still can't sing. So a lot's riding on this moment in her head. And after the second day of performing, she goes back, and her physical therapist, who's with her at all times pretty well, he notices that she points out that her foot has started to go into a spasm. That foot spasm then spreads to the other foot. She can't calm down, spreads to her hands, spreads to her face. And then he says she's face down on a massage table, and he says she's going into a crisis level seizure, and they have to administer 2 sprays in her nostril, and they're dating it. They have doctors on the phone. They're like, this, we're doing it at this time. It's this much. Like, they're very precise on their dose, but it, I believe, is an opioid type spray designed to try to help her relax in those moments. And he afterwards is addressing the camera and the rest of her staff and saying, anytime her brain is overstimulated, whatever that looks like to you, it could mean going to Canada's Wonderland, or it could mean taking the TTC. Anytime that happens for her, and this would have been one of those situations, she runs the risk of going into one of these episodes. And that, again, goes to show that when she was at the Grammys and came out on stage, how challenging that would have been, and that everyone thought, oh, Taylor wasn't giving her this big embrace, this big, bow down moment. Well, actually, everybody was given instructions like, kind of don't touch her, like kind of just treat her like she's in this glass box, because she is, and we just don't know. This is the path forward for somebody with such a rare disorder. They really are learning as they go. So if she goes, you would hope that it means she's reaching new heights in her progress. But the way that the film was left, you feel thankful that she's alive, and you really want her to like protect her health and well-being because she has children, she has people who love her, including all of her fans.
Part of me wishes she'd stop.
I know. You do think that
tell her to
I
stop,
just
though.
I know, Sarah, but I it's very different for me. I mean, as someone who's also sung since they were 10 years old, I certainly haven't achieved any kind of world fame. I would never in my life consider myself even a great singer. I'm a good singer. I'm nothing like that. And I mean that earnestly. I'm not fishing for compliments. I know what it is that I do.
But you understand.
I'm a songwriter. I do understand, but what I was about to say is that the stage has never been my life. I never looked at anyone at any time in my life and said, I want to be an international star. I wanted to be an artist. I wanted to be a songwriter. I wanted to be a creator. It's a very different thing than to aspire to fame and having the whole world know who you are. That's a whole different thing. And further to that, to have the stage be your life. The stage is not my life. It's a job. I love going out there and doing it. It's fun. If I didn't do it again tomorrow, I would be absolutely fine. I do a lot of other things. I've never hung my heart or my who I am as a person has nothing to do with music, which is so funny. It's part of the equation, but who I am is my friends, my dog, my land, my house, traveling, watching sports, reading books, writing. Do you know what I mean? I don't have a singular purpose in my life. So for her, yes, I'm absolutely not taking away from the tragedy that is, because listen, in a lot of ways she was indoctrinated very young as well. Like I said, Renee mortgaged his house. She was with this man who was 30 or 40 years older than her entire career until his death. And there's a lot of twists and turns within her personal story.
Well, and you also see
it's not normal. It's not a normal story.
No, it's an exceptional story, and I think that's part of why the documentary itself is so compelling. And you also see her dedication to stage performance, to live performance specifically.
The best, like I said, the best I've ever seen.
Agreed.
I've never seen anyone better, and I've seen her more than any other artist in my lifetime. When I have had an opportunity, I go see Celine Dion.
And you're like, it's always a great idea. Yeah. And she talks about and also too, the way, the accolades on her voice, the way, she held the highest note the longest at this song and all this stuff. And so she says, so now, if I come out and maybe I try singing lower or quieter or doing more like folk, but to then fall to the point that she's at from where she was, that's a grieving process. And you can very much see it's an active grief for her right now. And she's such a perfectionist too. Like you go through this warehouse of all of her outfits that she's worn on stage and at these shows. And she talks about the effort she put into, I wanted you to see the white shirt that popped through the cuffs, but I couldn't wear it underneath because it was too bunchy for me and I couldn't perform in it. So we put snaps on here. And she remembers the year that she wore it and where she was, her, it's her whole life.
Yeah.
And she loves her children, and I thought, Jan, you're gonna get a kick out of her dog. Her dog is like this big chunky Labrador retriever, and its name is Bear. And she's always hanging out with Bear, and you see her big cozy house. And the other thing too is the people who work for her, they love her. They've worked for her for 35 years.
That speaks volumes.
The way she addresses the person opening the car door for her, the way she is class. So I loved it. I think anyone, if you're a super Celine fan or not, the way that the film is done and the way the story is told is it touches on so many interesting things. You'll love it.
Well, she's got a world, literally a globe praying for her, sending her positivity. And I pray that in the next few years they do find a breakthrough. But we've looked at people like Michael J. Fox for the last 20 years, painstakingly making his way through Parkinson's disease. And the light that he has shone, Parkinson's was kind of this disease that was sort of old people. It was the shakes that you got when you turned 75. Yeah. There was very little understanding about it, very little spoken about it. This is a man that has raised hundreds of millions of dollars for Parkinson's research. Mm-hmm. And because of Michael J. Fox, the amount of progress that they've made in Parkinson's disease and neurological, because that is also a neurological disorder. Yeah. But the thing to note, everybody listening, this could happen to anybody at any time. She was having symptoms in 2008. So, when shit's happening to you guys, if you have numbness in fingers or toes, listen, I'm not trying to make anyone paranoid, but don't leave it for 5 years. Make sure that you do go to your doctor. There's so many things going on in the world right now. I don't know. It seems like there's more stuff. It seems like multiple sclerosis, like MS. You're seeing all these young people, Christina Applegate, and there's
Selma Blair too. Yeah,
Selma Blair. Just these young women getting something that was so rare, and it's not rare anymore. And anyway. And then they're talking about Parkinson's being particularly a dominant force in British Columbia. Weird. There's a lot of it there, more than anyone. Like Michael J. Fox has spoken to that about that. Anyhow, thank you for reporting back. I'm sorry it was under. The other thing I want to touch on before I let you go, I've got a few minutes. Please talk about Justin Timberlake.
Okay, Justin Timberlake got arrested for a DUI in Sag Harbor, which is pretty well the Hamptons, like Hamptons adjacent. So he's there partying with some friends and claims that he only had one martini. The officers, I guess, who administered his field sobriety test said, I don't think so. So they pulled him over. They had him, he refused a breathalyzer 3 times. That's kind of a red flag.
But any lawyer would tell you to refuse
for
a
sure,
breathalyzer.
for sure. So he's refused it 3 times, and then he can't walk, the straight line. He's wobbly, he's glassy, his speech is slowed, and so his car was swerving when he drove, and so they take him in. But because Justin Timberlake has become a very reviled public figure in recent years, and deservingly. Well, because of the whole thing he did with Britney, because of the way he treated Britney. Janet Jackson, a lot of people don't like the Trolls song. He's repeatedly, allegedly cheated on Jessica Biel. Like, there's a lot of allegations out there about him treating women like crap.
Well, so this is not boding well for him then, is it?
No, but I just want to say that there is an account, you've probably seen it if you're on Twitter, called Pop Crave. And so Pop Crave has this, like, you'd recognize it if you saw the icon, the thumbnail that you use, and they report on pop culture all the time. And because Twitter changed their verification rules that anyone with like $5 a month can buy a blue check mark and look verified, a lot of satire accounts came out. One satire account came out called Poo Crave, pretending to be Pop Crave. And they posted an update on Justin Timberlake that people actually fell for. From the account Poo Crave that said Justin Timberlake allegedly had traces of Molly, poppers, Truvada, and coke in his bloodstream following his DWI arrest in New York. And everyone, like, I had friends say this to me. Oh, well, he had X, Y, and Z. I was like, do you guys think that they got the forensics back fast enough?
Already?
They got the lab back?
Like, overnight, they have the...
Like, and number one, and it's from an account whose handle is called Poo Crave. So we need to start teaching media literacy in schools. I think he can afford a driver. He can afford an Uber. There's no excuse for, having 2-3 martinis and getting behind the wheel of your car. Like, you're a loser. But question your headlines, everyone. Question your headlines.
Well, there was also something about the police officer that arrested him had no idea who he was.
I thought
hilarious.
He's like, this is really going to affect my tour.
He said under his breath, he's like, this is going to be really bad for the tour. And the officer was like, what tour? And he said the world tour. And I thought, he has an opportunity right now to rebrand his tour as called What Tour. Like, if he called his tour What Tour, I honestly think he might see a boost in ticket sales, because ticket sales have been not very good for him. But yeah, a young small town police officer not knowing who Justin Timberlake is incredible. And it's also violence against elder millennials, because it made me feel like I was 10,000 years old.
Well, listen, there's a lot going on today. We're going to really switch gears here. We have a really amazing guest come out, and I'm going to give her a proper introduction when we come back from this short break to expound the virtues of our sponsor. And, thank you, Wonder Bra. Thank you, Intact Insurance. Thank you to everyone that's supporting the Jann Arden pod, because we want to keep doing big things, don't we, girls? We're even planning a live event sometime.
Hell yeah.
Hopefully this year, where you guys can come. Anyway, we're going to be right back after this short break. Don't go away. Catherine Legge is going to join us, and we got so much more to talk about. Well, gracious good day, everyone. This is your friend, Jann Arden. I'm here with Sarah Burke and Caitlin Green, who are both in their Toronto abodes. And I'm also in my Toronto abode today. I have flown in to see the Sarah McLachlan concert tonight. So by the time you hear this on Friday, I will have been there. I probably will have been crying most of the night and reminiscing about my youth. The Fumbling Towards Ecstasy record that really launched Sarah into the stratosphere is 30 years old this year. 30 years old. We have a lot of music to talk about today, but we also have, right out of the gate, someone who is so amazing. Apparently, we have spoken a couple of times before, and I'm going to have Catherine address that. Catherine Legge is an award-winning, brilliant filmmaker. She's a showrunner. She's a journalist, an executive producer, a programmer. She has worn many, many hats. And honestly, if I go into the lengthy amount of things that this woman has done in her career, we won't have any time to talk to her. She has a real penchant for intimate investigative documentaries, which lends themselves so much into this true crime realm. She's worked on The Fifth Estate, very, very wonderful documentary called The Unsolved Murder of Beverly Lynn Smith, an Oshawa woman. So a real Canadian connection there. Her new film, which I'm going to let her talk about, her new podcast is dealing with a crime in Louisiana of someone who was falsely accused. Without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, the wonderful Catherine Legge joins us today on the Jann Arden podcast. Catherine, hi.
Hi, thank you for that wonderful intro and
rambling.
bringing back the memories of Sarah McLachlan. I can't believe it's been 30 years. That's amazing.
Yeah. Catherine, let's just get right into, first of all, your new podcast, which is going to be launching very soon. It's going to be here on the Women in Media Network, family. So we're pretty excited about that. So tell Catherine, tell us about what you've been doing and what's happening today in your world.
Sure. Okay. So I can't think of a better place for it because, I kind of stumbled onto Sarah on LinkedIn of all places because I was, in the midst of my frenzy of trying to put together any kind of piece of journalistic, documentary, any kind of work these days in very tough and dynamic markets. And I was going through all the regular channels. I'm very experienced, as you said, and in good ways and bad. And you get to know what you're up against when you come up with a new project. And I was up against all of it and working independently, driven by passion, starting to feel like documentary would be a hobby of mine rather than actual ever providing income again. And so I found her and I connected immediately with the indie spirit. And then when I found the network, and of course, heard of your story and Caitlin's story, and I know your story, of course, huge fan going way back, Jann. I just think it's one of independence, and it's one of, women at the top of their game, having a certain amount of know-how, wisdom, accumulated, rights we've done, wrongs we've done, things we've figured it out, and being able to really stretch in the right ways. And so, I talked to Sarah and I said, listen, I have this huge story. It's not something that's going to be, it's not a big documentary about a famous sports person or celebrity. So it's going to be a hard sell. It's really important. I'm basically working to save a man's life right now. It's life or death stakes. And I think even bigger than that in terms of our justice system. And I need to get it going. And I just kind of, she said, well, let's just start. And I felt so liberated. Isn't that the most liberating thing you can imagine, is just saying, let's just start.
Yeah.
And I've been working with this wonderful woman, Suzanne Reber, who's, kind of a me version in podcasting. She's a pioneer. She's one of the first people who really created podcasting, investigative journalist, won every major award and trailblazer. And then we have a young, hardest working woman in show business, Tara Suri, who's working with us. And she's bringing up the Gen Zs for us. And she is, jumped right in too. So all of us, we just said, let's do it. And here we are.
Tell us about the story. Tell us about this man that you're trying to save from the gallows, as it were.
It's true. So you start to wonder. I mean, when I pitch this to people, I say, yes, it's about a wrongful conviction. And most people say, oh, it's so sad. There's so many of those. And my question is, why? Why are there so many of those? And why are there so many of those playing out right now from the 90s? And it's funny you mentioned 30th anniversary, because this story is actually on its 30th anniversary. And I can't say too much about it because it is highly investigative. This person's life and liberty are at risk. And at this point, we're navigating things very carefully. We've got essentially the state up against us.
Yeah.
We've got, the powers of the state fighting back on this case. And so we are being very cautious about details. But what I can tell you is that this is a case of justice gone very wrong. It's a case, the title of it is The Murder That Never Happened. And that tells you right away that this is a very unique story. And tying in that idea of why are there so many wrongful convictions from the 90s, I was able to look at his story where essentially a town and police, prosecutors, and the people of this town
Small
came
town, I would
together.
imagine.
Small town,
Yeah.
not small enough, but small town. They came together, and in what I describe as a moral panic, they framed a man for a murder that never happened. He was convicted for the worst, most heinous crime you can imagine. The details are an absolute horror show. He was convicted with experts and evidence, documents. Everything was provided to this jury to present one side of this story. And he was convicted and sent to
What a
death row.
nightmare. What an absolute nightmare.
Yeah.
My brother spent 28 years in jail for a crime that he still to this day says he did not commit, that he had nothing to do with. The interesting thing that you say about the 90s is, and people don't realize this, DNA had yet to make its appearance on the world stage. So and Catherine would know a lot about this, if you were a person that, was involved in a crime or not in a crime, the DNA can either convict you or exonerate you. My brother's DNA was collected, of course, after it happened, and as was the victims, and it was all burned, 12, 13, 14 years after he'd been in prison. And the RCMP basically just said, it's our right. We don't have space or whatever. They literally burned evidence that would have exonerated him, according to him. But anyway, he gladly gave all his stuff. But it is interesting and heartbreaking. And I'm sure there's pushback for you as a filmmaker taking the side of someone who has been accused of a heinous crime. And here you are defending him. So you have the family of this person that was murdered, probably pushing back, like, we've got our man, leave sleeping dogs lie, let them lie. Like, what kind of things are you dealing with on that side?
I mean, I didn't know those details about your brother. It's so interesting. But of this era, you're right. One of my key notes on this is pre-DNA, right?
Yep.
Like pre-DNA, what you had was the state, and they had, the police, the prosecutors in the US especially, they're elected, and they've got, they've got to get a conviction. And then you've got experts that they had, and the state would put up these experts that would testify with absolute certainty to the most ridiculous things, blood spatter and bite marks and hair analysis and all of this nonsense, fake, forensic science. And they would say it's 100% sure that this person did it. So what's a jury to do? Interestingly enough, a couple of other people who were convicted on similar evidence to the man in this case, they've been exonerated by DNA since. But because this crime didn't happen, it wasn't a crime. It was an accident.
Bizarre.
It's so bizarre. It actually turned out there was a death, but it was not a murder. And this is what he will be able to prove this fall when he goes to court, when they actually undo the original trial and bring experts and testimony, some from the same trial, to prove his innocence and even prove that the crime didn't happen.
And
But
if
he
not,
doesn't actually have that exonerating moment, because how can you prove a negative? So it's really interesting but also in this case, and this is something so common of this era of the 90s, and this is why I think all convictions from that era should be questioned, especially ones that are death penalty level. Like, you got to be pretty damn sure.
Well, thank God we don't have that in Canada.
Thank God.
Thank God my brother didn't face that.
But you
go
know
ahead.
what, Jan? There's people here talking about bringing it back. And I think we're one election away from it being reconsidered. We have leaders talking about life without parole, a terrible idea. It has never worked. We have leaders talking about extending sentences. We have leaders talking about reintroducing capital punishment in Canada. And it's at its highest percentage of favor since it was abolished in 1979. So you're right. I countlessly look at similar cases to this and say, at least we didn't have the death penalty in Canada. But I know people in Canada that the Innocence Project has cleared, helped exonerate, and they maybe spent 1 or 2 years in prison for the same crime as this gentleman, but their lives are destroyed. And you know that you don't get it back again.
My
You
brother
don't get
is
it back.
I mean, the very famous case in Canada, of course, is David Milgaard, who was accused of a crime that he did not commit, and he was released eventually, and he got a fairly substantial amount of money. And we all know what happens when you give people that are ill prepared to receive millions of dollars and go out into the world, and all the people around him that gave him bad advice. But it was a tragedy. There was
It is.
no way back. What is the long game here? So let's say this man who remains nameless right now in Louisiana, is that correct?
That's right.
So what if he is indeed proven innocent of this whole bizarre murder that he was convicted for? What is your hopes for this man? Like, will he walk into the sunshine one day? Is this what you hope?
Well, right now, it's only because, part of this story is this whole peak crime that happened in the 90s, and that this panic, this moral panic about peak crime. It was in Canada, it was in the US and the UK, all at the same time.
Speak to that a little bit, because
Okay.
I don't know exactly what
This is
means.
fascinating. But if you were to look at when they started measuring violent crime in 1960,
Okay.
and then and you looked at 2024 today, it would look like this, like a mountain. And basically at the top of the peak of that mountain is 1991 to 3. And that was just a demographic trend. It's so interesting now that when I preach statistics. And so when you understand the statistics, you can see that demographically, there was just a huge population of young people. And they were in their 20s around that time, teens to 20s, which is the prime time for committing crimes. And this was the pre-DNA time. And we had these moral panics. The satanic panic was going on. This idea, the Central Park Five were convicted wrongly at this time. Now the exonerated five, the West Memphis Three, there's all these big cases of absolute hysteria that happened from the public that made justice go very, very wrong. This is one of those cases. And I believe this is playing out across the country in death rows across America right now, and some still in Canada. People who were wrongly convicted at that time out of a hysteria and a moral panic and not really good laws. But we made these bad laws. I mean, interestingly enough, in Canada, we did almost nothing, but in the US, they created this 1994 crime bill that's still playing out today. And only because of one little reform that was created, which was a factual innocence law in Louisiana, this man was able to get his case on the books. He would not even have got a court date if it were not for this little reform that happened. And that's why it's so important we understand the laws that we have around crime and punishment when we're taking people's lives and liberty.
How did you hear about this?
Just my research.
And what was it that, I mean, out of the thousands, I would imagine, of people, men and women, who are wrongfully convicted, what drew you to this man? And
So
this
this is
case
kind
in
of
particular, kind of the lack of, you said there was a body, but that this body was not murdered. It was nothing nefarious. They just made up a murder?
Well, there are thousands of cases of non-true crime, it's called, or non-murder murder cases every year.
This is horrifying to me.
It is, because, and where it comes from, Jann, and this is what's so interesting, is it usually comes from a coroner, medical examiner. This is the power of the state, where one person's determining something is a homicide or something is not a homicide. And so a lot of times medical examiners can
Like if
make
someone was to
mistakes.
fall down the stairs and
That's
all of a
right.
sudden the son is a suspect, the husband's a suspect, the 14-year-old daughter's a suspect. So you have one guy walking in there going, the way her neck broke on that third step, that was intentional.
Exactly. And it happens, the saddest thing is it happens mostly with children and parents. So you've got a parent who's already lost a
Christ.
child. I mean, this was the case for all these shaken baby syndrome, which we know is junk science. You know, you look at the Ontario now disgraced Charles Smith.
Well, you know what's funny, Catherine, is that so this was an area that was interesting to me. I actually studied making documentary films when I was back in school. And I worked momentarily in the photo research department at the Toronto Star. And who joins the photo library at the Toronto Star shortly after his release, but Robert Baltovich. Robert Baltovich is a famous case here in Toronto, where he was wrongfully convicted and served 8 years in prison for the murder of his, at the time, girlfriend Elizabeth Bain. This was also around the time that the Scarborough rapist was very active and becoming increasingly violent around the U of T Scarborough campus, which is where Elizabeth attended. And so the police did what they always kind of do in these cases that go so sideways, is they develop this first theory and they put blinders on and then they don't see past it. And because she expressed in her diaries some issues with Robert in their relationship, they zero in on him as being the likely suspect. He also at the time was like, when I met him, he was coming out of jail, so he had been pretty traumatized. But you could also see that he was very methodical in his thinking and the way that he presented. And so someone like that perhaps wouldn't necessarily interview it well with police. And they just decided that this guy did it, and they threw him in prison, and his conviction was overturned, although they never awarded him any sort of financial compensation for the 8 years that he spent in prison. And so I have been aware of the wrongful convictions, at least in Canada, for a long, long time, like Charles Smith being a really great example of someone who worked at Sick Kids Hospital, a renowned, world-renowned hospital, and was considered this top pathologist who would put parents in jail for shaking their children to death. And it just was not true. And then he basically claimed that it was a failing of competency on his part versus him trying to put parents in jail. But I don't see how you can possibly say that if you are that incompetent at your job and being called repeatedly to court to put people away, that you have no intent at that point. Like, I don't think that was fair. And Canada thinks that we're great at all this stuff. And I actually think we're embarrassingly bad. And I crossed paths with James Lockyer, who was now in charge of Innocence
he
Canada.
worked with my brother for years.
Yes, exactly.
He's amazing. James is, I don't know what we'll do without James. I mean, he's semi-retired, but, and this is why it's so important to be doing this story, because we did grow up with these stories. I was at a Innocence Canada project meeting, and, you know, I was young in my career. This is what inspired me to big justice stories. And David Milgaard was there. Stephen Truscott was there, you know, and there was, Guy Paul Moran was there. Like, I mean, it was haunting to see the 1,000-mile stare in these men's eyes after what they'd been through. And, you know, and so knowing those stories makes us vigilant about facts and vigilant about, are we sure? Because the stakes are so high. And it also makes us careful about what police and what prosecutors are saying and what information the state is putting forward. They have all the power. All we have is innocent until proven guilty. That's it. And when I say we, it's because this could happen to any of us, right? That's the one thing I learned. And you're right. Parents lost their children. Parents who were grieving their children
And
were
then they're convicted of murdering them.
And many of them,
it is fucking horrible.
It is. And many of them are actually, there's thousands we don't even know of that plead guilty because, and I know when I was at the Fifth Estate, we did a story tapping into this, an award-winning piece. And we looked at the idea of the power of the state and what information's put forward. And a lot of people just say, listen, I'm not going to go up against the medical examiner who says this is what happened and proves a pattern of abuse. And in fact, there's no evidence, you know, or it's questionable. And if it's questionable, it's reasonable doubt.
Yeah. I want to bring you back to one thing too. Like, so back to like what Jann was asking about, like how you stumbled upon this man. We need to know that connection. And then also the immediacy of how this man can have the electric chair if this goes wrong.
Absolutely. So when in 2016 I started this documentary, Met While Incarcerated. It was my first prison time, and it's a documentary. It's also about I focused on three powerful, intelligent, and successful women who met and married a man who was in prison for violent crime. And I really committed early on that I was going to tell a love story, and that it was not going to be me trying to argue the average person into seeing, the value in these relationships, the idea of forgiveness, redemption, the idea of rehabilitation, that people change, all of the things that we know, but fail to recognize when we get into this us versus them world of incarceration. And so I made that film, and one of the couples was a middle school teacher from Louisiana, and she watched Dead Man Walking, and she reached out to a man on death row and wrote him a letter out of kindness and said, I'm thinking about you, like, you're not worthless, you're not a monster. And he wrote back, and they developed a relationship, and they've been together ever since. And so I developed a relationship with him. And so I have these death row connections now in Louisiana. And so I have very unique and privileged access to people who at this moment are terrified, because there's 57 people on death row in Louisiana. There's been a moratorium on executions there for almost 20 years because they're terrible at it. Louisiana is terrible at justice. They had so many death row convictions overturned and exonerations that they got put on hold, on pause.
So they're quite frightened of the fact that the men that they are holding could very well not be responsible for the crimes that they're accused of. So they literally said, we're not gonna.
No, they didn't. They got told. So one of the issues is that no one will give them the chemicals for lethal injection anymore. And the other issue is that really the federal government oversees executions at the state level. They have an oversight. And so they've been put on hold until they could figure out some of their issues with how they were going to perform executions. And frankly, the Louisiana public is really on the fence. Like, they almost abolished the death penalty a year ago. And so they're very Catholic, and there's a Catholic side to them that says, that they don't believe in the death penalty. There's a part of that, their history, but they're on the fence, and they know they're bad at it. They're not great at justice. There's so much corruption in Louisiana. And so, but what happened is in January, there's a new governor in town. And Governor Jeff Landry was elected. He came in on a tough on crime, moral panic platform, terrifying everyone about the crime situation, where crime is actually down in Louisiana, as it is everywhere. And he came in on this platform that said he was going to execute everyone on death row within the next 4 years.
Jesus.
And he promised that he would use any means necessary. He offered up the electric chair, which hasn't been used since the 80s.
Oh,
he offered up
come on.
This new nitrous gas. He offered up, which is so controversial and really torture. He offered up, even hanging was on the table, going back to lynching people. And the other one was firing squad is also an option.
I would pick that. Sorry.
Yeah.
Now we know.
I there's no way. I mean, listen, there's no end to, the problems in a very broken system.
Yeah.
And obviously, the United States is dealing with hundreds of millions more people than we, as far as the general population. But I applaud you for taking this on. I wish we could talk to you for 14 hours. I really look forward to your podcast being on the Women in Media Network. I think people are going to find it fascinating. What is the name of your podcast, Catherine Legge?
So our our main title is, because I'm doing a documentary and a podcast,
Yes.
The Murder That Never Happened, because I want people to remember this is not a murder mystery. It's a justice gone wrong story. And then the other, and we're hoping it comes out in August, but I hope to come back and update your listeners and bring them in the tent as we have more unfolding.
She's going to be in Louisiana as it happens in September.
Well, that'll be so great. And please let us know how it goes. You are welcome on the Jann Arden podcast anytime, Catherine Legge.
Thank you.
Congratulations. It's a difficult slog to do this, and it's upsetting. And whenever you do any kind of advocacy work, it steals your sleep. So people need to understand, this isn't just a job. This is something that creators are very passionate about. And I don't think you would do this without really having your heart and soul into it. So make sure you look after yourself, Catherine.
Thank you.
And let us know how it goes. But yeah, that's been our guest today, Catherine Legge. Please watch for The Murder That Never Happened.
Thank you.
Caitlin, what's going on with our, we've had some callers. We actually had some freaking voicemails.
Voice notes.
Boy, Jesus. And I never get that right. Voice notes.
So our summer playlist is officially there for you in the show notes today, and we have to say some thank yous.
I'm going to start with this one from Prince Edward Island. There is a woman named Joanne who wants to add Irish Mythin to the playlist. Mythin. Oh, Mythin. I've already
Irish
butchered this for
Mythin.
her.
Well, who would know?
As a 50% PE Islander, care of my dad, I wanted to start with that. But Dancing in the Dark, hell yeah, Carol. I love Dancing in the Dark. Love Bruce Springsteen. Thank you, Denise. Lori Lynn from Kingston, who loves Atlanta Miles, Bad English, and Bryan Adams. I mean, those are great. These are great places to start. I feel like we're going to have a lot of stuff.
Is Atlanta Miles summertime? But I am not summertime. So anyone who has even mentioned me, and somebody did in their voice note, oh, and you're on that list, Jan. No, I can't possibly be summertime. And I'm sorry. If you are the type of person that has me on your summertime playlist, I apologize, because you are not doing great in life.
What season do you see yourself as?
I am just between the 12th of January and probably the 1st of March. What season is that?
I think you're autumnal. I think you're more of an autumn vibe.
Oh, God. Well,
you're like a Q1 or a Q2. I think. Who did add Jan to the playlist? Was it you, Caitlin?
It was one of the people
Jan?
that it was one of the voice notes that we got.
Yeah,
I know, but one of you two also added.
I might have added something. I might get in there and add one of my own. I do have a couple of happy songs. Okay, listen, I gotta go.
Okay.
I'm a very, very busy woman. Thank you for your on-the-ground reporting, and Celine. Cannot wait to see that June 25th, Amazon. But like Caitlin said, if it's in a theater near you, run, don't walk. Crawl if you have to. Celine's word.
Yes.
We'll see it this weekend. Sarah Burke, as always, thank you. And to all our listeners, subscribe. We love you. We really do. And we get so many nice comments and so many people coming up to me, and I could tell you more. Anyway, I gotta go. We'll see you next time. Jann Arden Pod. Toodly-doo.